Jessica LaBelle, excited to have her today. She actually used to be with us at the Washington State Department of Agriculture, but she has since joined the Washington Invasive Species Council as an invasive species program specialist. So within the pest program, she worked on projects from apple maggot to vineyard snail. She holds a bachelor's degree in English from the University of Alaska Anchorage and a master's degree in agricultural sciences and extension education from Colorado State University. She will be speaking on the biology of emerald ash borer, an invasive wood-boring insect that has been detected in British Columbia and Oregon, and about Washington State's development of resources and management guide to prepare for this invasive species. So welcome, Jessica.
Thanks, Cassie, and thanks for that great intro. Hello, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to present today. My name is Jessica Bell, and I'm the Invasive Species Program Specialist for the Washington Invasive Species Council. And I'm here today with my colleague Fiona Paquette of the Samara Group, and we're going to talk to you about the emerald ash borer, its biology, the threat its establishment would pose to our way of life in Washington, and the development of the Washington State Emerald Ash Borer Resources and Management Guide. So I'm going to get us started, and then Fiona is going to jump in later on. First, just a brief intro of where I work and what the council is. The Washington Invasive Species Council was established by state legislature in 2006 and tasked with providing policy-level direction, planning, and coordination to empower those engaged in the prevention, detection, and eradication of invasive species. We have a strategic plan that builds upon local, state, and regional efforts, and we serve as a forum for invasive species education and a central hub for invasive species communication and reporting. The council consists of representatives from multiple state, federal, municipal, and non-governmental organizations, as well as tribal nations. So really looking at all these folks here, the council is a broad spectrum of experts that work together collaboratively. The council also has an industry advisory panel, and I'd like to give a shout out to the Washington State Recreation and Conservation Office, which is the administrative host of the Washington Invasive Species Council. The Recreation and Conservation Office, or RCO, is a small state agency that manages grant programs to create and protect recreational opportunities outdoors, state wildlife habitat, working farms and forests, and help salmon and orca recovery. So I'm here today to talk about the emerald ash borer. Emerald ash borer is a small wood-boring jewel beetle that, like many invasive species, is really quite beautiful. It has these metallic green wing covers and kind of a coppery metallic abdomen, although that's really only visible when it has its wings open and it's flying. So most of the time it looks like this little kind of cigar-shaped tiny insect on that penny. Really small, about 3/4 of an inch long as an adult. The larvae are, bigger, which often happens in insects, and I still find weird, but the larvae can get up to about 1.5 inches long. And they're in that lower left corner. They're the most damaging life stage of this insect, and they eat these zigzag galleries through the bark of ash trees. And one of the ways that emerald ash borer damaged is identified is through these unique exit holes, which are shaped like tiny capital Ds in the bark of ash trees. And in that picture on the bottom, you can see that one kind of peeking its head out. That's a little D-shaped exit hole just kind of sitting on its front. And they attack ash trees in the Fraxinus genus. So true ash, not things like mountain ash, which are in a different genus, but true ash trees. And several species of ash are now critically endangered due to this insect. So here in the Pacific Northwest, we have one native ash species, which is the Oregon ash, or Fraxinus latifolia. However, various other species of ash have been popular ornamental or street tree plantings in urban and suburban areas. So it's not the only species that we're worried about. We love all of our trees. The goal, of course, is going to keep our ash trees looking like this beautiful one on the left and not like this one. This one is a dead ash tree that has been debarked to show those galleries created by the emerald ash borer larvae. So you see they're quite distinctive. Emerald ash borer was first found in North America in 2002 in Michigan, and it's since been detected in 37 states and in Washington, D.C. So on this map, all of the colored areas are infested with emerald ash borer. The light blue just kind of covers a pretty broad span of time from 2002 to 2022. Infestation, the dark blue is from 2023, bright purple is from 2024, and then dark purple is 2025. So you can see how it's spreading just from year to year. Emerald ash borer has decimated tens of millions of ash trees across our country in less than 25 years. And you might note that this map, it doesn't include infested areas in our neighbor to the north, but they are there. In some places, emerald ash borer has been found in 6 Canadian provinces in Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Quebec, Ontario, Manitoba, and most notably for us here in Washington in British Columbia. And as you can see from this map, EAB has also been found in Oregon. So Washington State does not have any current detections of emerald ash borer, but they have been found directly to the north of us and directly to the south of us, and those detections have been very close to our borders. So we are concerned. And let's talk about why we're concerned. Washington State produces over $3 billion annually in timber and accounts for 25% of U.S. log and lumber product exports and 9% of U.S. paper products. Obviously, ash trees are only a part of this, but they are important. And also failing trees, dead and dying trees, can affect the trees around them. And then also at risk are resources that we can't really put a dollar value on, like our environment, the trees and plants in our urban and suburban landscapes, and cultural resources. And a particular challenge around emerald ash borer is that the species was deregulated federally and removed from the United States Department of Agriculture priority pest list. And this is due to it being established in so many other states. And in those states, management is going to be the responsibility of the landowner. So people in states where emerald ash borer is established, they need to choose which trees they want to save and risk losing the rest of their ash trees. So in states like Washington, where emerald ash borer is not established, this deregulation severely affected the funding available for prevention. Really, there isn't any. The Washington State Department of Agriculture previously conducted surveys for emerald ash borer, but had to discontinue due to lack of funding. So since emerald ash borer only preys on ash in the Fraxinus genus, it's not an agricultural pest, but we do have multi-agency kind of jurisdiction here because the Washington State Department of Agriculture houses the SPRO, or the State Plant Regulatory Official, and they're responsible for kind of first detection, identification, and federal reporting. So if emerald ash borer were to be detected in Washington, a specimen would need to be obtained the first time it was found in each county, and then sent to WSDA so they could identify it and report it to USDA. But then after those initial detections, it would be other organizations that would step up, like the Department of Natural Resources and Washington State University might end up taking the lead. So this is a lot more complex process than usual for an invasive insect. And it's really important that we all kind of come together and work together. Another kind of point there is that you know emerald ash borer could potentially be moved in firewood, So that's a whole nother level of like demographics of people to talk to, people camping, burning, all different kinds of things. And different agencies, work with that also. But we are taking steps to prepare for emerald ash borer, and it is definitely a group effort. So the Washington Invasive Species Council received a $47,000 grant from the Washington State Department of Natural Resources as pass-through funds from the U.S. Forest Service, and that's to develop the Washington State Emerald Ash Borer Resources and Management Guide. And to do that, we formed the Washington State Emerald Ash Borer Interagency Working Group. And the group consists of the partners listed here, from state to federal to universities and municipalities. And all are kind of working together to write and review the resources and management guide. And the council has also partnered with Samara Group LLC, which is an environmental administrative consulting firm to design and manage the development of the guide. And Samara Group is a women-owned small business that the council has worked successfully with on past projects. And they're also involved with EAB response in other states, so they bring some great expertise to the table. And I'm now going to pass it over to Fiona Paquette of the Samara Group to tell you more about the project.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jessica. All right. So yeah, I'm going to be talking about the Washington State Emerald Ash Borer Resources and Management Guide. So the purpose of this guide is to have a single resource that kind of details all of these important topics surrounding EAB, and talk specifically about what it will look like in Washington State. There are a lot of great resources online about EAB now. It's kind of become a more well-known pest within the past few years. Some of this information is really great, some not so much, and just not specific to Washington. So the goal of this is to have that single resource that folks can kind of point to in Washington to get that accurate information. And as Jessica mentioned, we really wanted this to be a collaborative process. So we've been using the expertise of the members in our interagency working group. We have had around 20 different writing contributors who have helped to develop different sections of this guide. And we now have our first full draft that is open for review. So I'm going to kind of quickly be going through the different chapters of this guide and talking about what it covers generally. And then we'll go over some of the processes for reviewing if you're interested. So next slide, please. So this is kind of the outline of the guide, obviously starting out with the title page, and then we get into how to use this guide. So everyone who's picking this up might not necessarily need to read it from start to finish. It is pretty extensive. A lot of the resources that we get into, some of the information is very specific. So some of the folks will be able to kind of jump around as you're reading this guide to see where it's most useful for you. And of course, you can use that table of contents to navigate through the different sections. We also have these at a glance pages for all of the chapters, which are kind of like executive summaries, kind of more standalone pages that kind of pull out the important information for you to be able to glance through what each chapter covers in more detail. And then, of course, the detailed chapters themselves. As I mentioned, we've had some really great specialists in our interagency working group who have helped to develop all of these different sections. So we have a lot of really great and specific information for those who are interested in getting those very specific details. And then each chapter we will have resources and materials that you can click on to learn about new information as things come up, or just where you can learn more about different topics. And then, of course, the end of guide references. So next slide. So just kind of getting into the main chapters here, I'll try to make this fairly quick. It starts out with the introduction and background, and this introduces EAB and explains why it's a significant concern for Washington, describes the biology and life cycle, similar to what Jessica just presented. And kind of highlights how these characteristics influence the detection, spread, and the different management options that we're going to be talking about later in the plan. The chapter also provides an overview of ash trees in Washington, both the native and cultivars, and outlines the known pathways of spread with this emphasis on how it can be assisted by human movement like firewood. Next slide. So then we get into chapter 2, which is the impacts of an EAB invasion. We talk about these potential impacts, again, specific for what that's going to look like in Washington state. So we go over some of the environmental risks to our forests, riparian areas, and associated wildlife habitat, as well as we start to talk about the economic risks, what this will look like for local municipalities, agencies, and private landowners. We also talk about street trees and what this loss of canopy cover is going to look like, how that will impact different communities. We talk about the different public safety concerns associated with that. And we have a really great section that outlines the cultural importance of Oregon ash, our native ash, for tribal nations and indigenous communities. Next slide. So then we get into chapter 3, which is readiness, and this focuses on the preparedness actions that can be taken now before EAB is officially detected in Washington state. So it covers the ash loss prevention planning, the different survey and detection protocols, how to report EAB if you suspect it to be found. The chapter also talks about monitoring approaches, visual surveys, and the different trap-based methods. We also have some great GIS resources and maps included within the guide that talk about where we have ash tree mapped across the state and where we have kind of gaps in that knowledge and where we're hoping to fill that in. And then there's also considerations for how we can secure funding specifically for this preparedness step. Slide. So then we get into chapter 4, which is response strategies, and this describes what will be implemented when EAB, unfortunately, is likely to be detected in Washington state. So we discuss the expected impacts of this no EAB state response, like Jessica was mentioning, what that will look like when we don't have an official state response, but we have all of these coordinated agencies working together. So we have all these planning and response strategies listed and how to identify the different key stakeholders involved, like the agencies and partners, and who to contact is kind of outlined within this chapter. And then we also have more information on emergency funding options and additional response resources that can help support this rapid action. Next slide. So then we get into chapter 5, which is management, and this kind of talks about the longer term management options for dealing with EAB in Washington. This provides information on the available treatment approaches, including insecticides and biological control options. We also talk about the considerations for wood disposal and reutilization and the different concerns coming from standing trees and the removal of all of these ash trees once we have more significant EAB risks. Next slide. And then lastly, chapter 6 is outreach and education, and this kind of emphasizes the importance of early outreach and communications in both EAB preparedness and response. We have it kind of broken out into these two categories of what is communications going to look like before it is officially detected and what will it look like after. We also outline within this communication plan the targeted outreach efforts for our key audiences who we're hoping to reach with this guide. And the education management plan kind of goes over the key information that we want everyone to take away from reading this and knowing what the next steps are. Next slide. So that is all of the main chapters in the guide. It is, as I said, a fairly extensive document. There's a lot covered in there, but we're hoping that it's going to be a really great resource for everyone to pick up. I mentioned previously that there are references and resources linked throughout. We'll have individual end of chapter summaries that will have those materials for everyone who wants to kind of learn a little bit more, take the next step into figuring out what's next. And then also at the end of the document, we'll have all of their additional resources that were used to put this together. We are currently in the design phase right now, so we really want this to be a well-designed and clear and accessible document for everyone who's picking this up. So this is kind of our draft that we're working with right now. We're making some additions to this draft currently, but this is what the at-a-glance pages will look like. We're hoping that those can be kind of a standalone document for some of our outreach efforts, as well as just being a good summary for what's to come in each of the more detailed chapters. So more to come with the design on that. But yeah, I think we can go to the next slide. So as I mentioned, this draft is open for comment right now. So if you are interested in reviewing this guide that we have put together, you can see my email here at the bottom of the page, fiona@samarapdx.com. Please reach out to me and I would be happy to send you the guide. If you're very knowledgeable in EAB, we'd love to hear from you. Or if you're just hearing about it for the first time today, we would still love to hear from you. We just really want this to be a useful resource for everyone who's picking up this guide. It is going to be a public-facing guide. It will be posted on the Washington Invasive Species Council website when it is fully completed, so everyone will be able to access it. But yes, if you are interested in reviewing at where we're at right now, email me and I will send you that draft guide as well as a feedback form. So you're welcome to give general feedback on how this can be a useful resource for you. You can review specific chapters. If you have questions or you want additional clarity on some of the content, anything like that, we would love to hear from you. So please reach out to me. This feedback form will be open until next week, March 13th. So you have some time to review it and submit that feedback. And yeah, we'll be incorporating that feedback across the rest of the month and finalizing this guide by the end of March. And again, it will be a public resource for everyone that we're hoping is going to be useful for everyone going forward. So yeah, I think that is everything I have to say on the guide right now. Thank you so much for allowing me to share that. I'll pass it back to you, Jessica.
Thanks, Fiona. So we are modeling the guide and its development after a previous successful project, which is the Washington State Spotted Lanternfly Action Plan. So I'm going to switch gears and switch species a little bit, and I'm going to talk a little bit about Spotted Lanternfly and that plan. We heard a really great in-depth talk about Spotted Lanternfly this morning from Josh Milnes. So I'm going to be brief about the insect itself and talk about the development of the state action plan and why we modeled the process for the Washington Emerald Ash Borer Resources and Management Guide after it. So super brief overview, or maybe first time overview for those who are joining in a little later in the day here. The spotted lanternfly, or Lycorma delicatula, it's an insect in the plant hopper family, and it has what we call piercing sucking mouth parts. You can see that outlined on the right with one that's flipped on its back. They thankfully don't pierce or suck people, but they are a massive threat to a variety of plants, and they feed on over 170 known species, with more being added as they expand into new areas. They're native to China, Bangladesh, and Vietnam, and they've been introduced and are considered invasive in South Korea, Japan, and the United States. They're not currently found in Washington State, but we are preparing for them, much like we are preparing for emerald ash borer. And the reason why spotted lanternfly is such an issue is because of how it feeds. It uses that piercing, sucking mouth part to puncture the stem or the trunk of a plant and drinks the phloem, or the sugary sap, out of it. That weakens the plant. However, the spotted lanternfly also continually excretes as it feeds, and their excrement is this sugary, sticky substance called honeydew, which you can see in the photo on the left. Honeydew promotes the growth of sooty mold, which you can see in the middle photo. And sooty mold decreases photosynthesis, it attracts other insects, pest insects, and it leaves the plant susceptible to more diseases, so the plant can often die. In addition, spotted lanternfly, they like to swarm feed, which you can see in that photo on the right, and it multiplies the problem pretty quickly. Now, spotted lanternfly has not been found in Washington State, but unlike emerald ash borer, it is under federal regulation and on the priority pest list, so there's more funding available to prepare for it. So the council received a $90,000 grant from the United States Department of Agriculture Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, Plant Protection and Quarantine, which is a mouthful that abbreviates to USDA APHIS PPQ. And we received that funding in 2022 to prepare for the arrival of spotted lanternfly really as best as we can. And to do that, we formed the Spotted Lanternfly Preparedness Advisory Group to develop a state action plan. And then with the additional funding, we were able to conduct more activities and provide preparedness tools to our partners like GIS maps and forms and outreach materials. We also held a series of workshops to increase public and industry awareness. And what's really cool about this plan is it was also collaboratively written by all the partners, which is really unique for a state action plan. And this was so successful that we're doing the same for the Emerald Ash Borer Guide and with the same administrative partner, the Samara Group. And if you want to see the Washington State Spotted Lanternfly Action Plan for yourself, which I highly recommend because I love it and I'm definitely not biased, you can find it by going to the Washington State Department of Agriculture website at agr.wa.gov/lanternfly. And these are some of the different topics that are covered by the plan. And then we've been talking about how invasive species management is a group effort, and that includes you listening in today. So if you think you have seen an emerald ash borer or a spotted lanternfly in Washington State, please report it. And you can report in a few different ways. You can report on your phone or tablet using the Washington Invasives app. This is a free app. Through the Washington Invasive Species Council, it routes reports directly to experts at lead agencies. It's in the Google Play and Apple Store. And again, it's free. The logo looks like our little logo in the bottom middle of the screen there with the little streams and the little birds. You can also report via our website at invasivespecies.wa.gov, or you can report by email. Take a photo, even if you think it's not a very good one. I am continually impressed by what entomologists can identify in a photo. They're extremely skilled. And then if you can grab the bug or save it if you can. Neither of these insects bite or sting. They can't hurt you, so you can handle them safely. Worst they can do is flap their wings at you a little bit. And really, the role of the individual, it really can't be understated in invasive species responses. And I've worked on many invasive species projects, and an incredible amount of progress has been made due to public reports. There are only a few invasive species professionals on each team. We really can't be everywhere at once. And we really need eyes across the state. And I know that we have a lot of folks from all over with us today. So if you're not in Washington State, please go to your state's applicable government website and find out what they're asking people to do and how you can help. And that's it for me. This is my contact information. Please feel free to reach out to me with any questions you might have. Visit the Washington Invasive Species Council website at invasivespecies.wa.gov and check out our free reporting app for smartphones with Washington Invasives. I also have Fiona's information here. So again, if you want to review the draft of the Washington Emerald Ash Borer Resources and Management Guide, please reach out to her via email and she can send that to you with the feedback form. And we're taking feedback on that through the 13th of March. So thank you. And are there any questions?
Yeah, so we'll help read the questions off to you. If you have questions, post them in the Q&A box or raise your hand and we'll try to unmute you. I think I saw a hand raised, so I'll try to get to that. Carla, maybe you can help. I thought I saw Lori raise her hand.
I don't see any hands raised at the moment.
Jessica, I believe that I've seen an emerald ash borer lookalike guide recently. Do you know where that's located that you could share with people watching this? There was a comment earlier about possibly seeing one on their farm and how the emerald wings were striking. So maybe if you could just share a little bit more about that or things that look like it. And yeah.
Yeah, we do have some native jewel beetles and bee prestids that look pretty similar to emerald ash borer. And I don't have, clicking through real fast to see if I have it saved on my easy access, but I don't. We do have images that have a lookalike guide for emerald ash borer, and I can dig those up on our website and throw that link in the chat for you guys.
Awesome. And then maybe while you're posting links in the chat, the link to the guide with the comments and the date due back, I think maybe some of us in the chat would be interested in referencing back to that.
Yeah, so we don't have it posted online, but we can provide that via email. And so that's going to be Fiona's email. Fiona, do you want to drop that in the chat? And then I have,
No problem.
I did find the lookalike guide. Here we go. So this is the emerald ash borer and lookalikes that you might find in Washington State. And this one here circled in the middle, that is our public enemy, the emerald ash borer. So that's the one we're looking for. And then these other ones, unless they have an asterisk by them, are either native or not species of concern. The one that does have an asterisk by it here is Japanese beetle. So a lot of people, they see that beautiful metallic green on an insect, and because they've heard the word emerald and they've heard the word invasive, through outreach and stuff, they think got to be emerald ash borer. But they are quite different. So this just shows the different ones, and some of them are jewel beetles. We get a lot of, we get a lot of number 5, this golden buprestid. They're very lovely, but you can kind of tell the difference because they have this gold reddish stripe in the middle, and they're a little bit fatter and rounder, and they're much larger. Emerald ash borer is pretty small. Emerald ash borer also has like these kind of odd, like kind of goggle eyes that are on the side of its face, and this really long kind of cylindrical cigar-shaped body. So you can see with these other guys, they might be long, but they're a little bit fat. I don't want to body shame the insects, but they're wider and thicker than emerald ash borer is kind of comparatively. And then we've got all different kinds of things, including, like weevils that are metallic green, some that are, even darker, like this green blister beetle. This one's really cool, the western tiger beetle. But yeah, lots of different metallic green things. So the great news is if you are wondering, you don't know what it is, just take a picture and report it. We can tell you. So we're always happy to do that. And I see that Fiona has posted that information in the chat. And I will also grab this lookalike guide and put it in there for you also. Leads directly to a PDF. And then have we gotten any questions come up?
Just when the guide is finished, where could it be found? The question verbatim was, where can we look for the finished EAB guide?
Yeah, so because it's still in process right now, we don't have drafts or anything posted online because we're still working on it, but we will host it on the Washington Invasive Species Council website at invasivespecies.wa.gov. And I will post that in the chat also.
So cool. Well, thanks, Jessica and Fiona. It's really nice to see things kind of happening here in Washington State. I'm going to go ahead and give a little ploy for, we've talked about it a couple different times now, but for the Washington Invasive Species app, I can get my slide to advance maybe. It is a good tool to download to report all these things that people have been talking about. It's a good pocket field guide for you. No. Cannot play media. I was going to show you a quick video on it as you open it up and you scroll through it. It actually has a pocket list. It's a good guide for your pocket that has invasive plant species. It shows them little pictures of them, and it shows descriptions, and it's a great place for you to go ahead and be able to report it. Here, I can play it on this one. And then we'll get back to our usual programming. Now I think I'm kicked off. Okay, so here's a little quick video for you. Okay, I have too many things going on in my computer, guys. Here. So you can use this to report the tree of heaven that we talked about. You can use this to report emerald ash borer. You can use this to report spotted lanternfly. But it also has plants and animals, and it goes ahead and it will, like I said, give you a really good list of different things. When you click on it, you can see the descriptions. It's a great field guide for your pocket. All right. So Justin is actually the Aquatic Invasive Species Division Manager for the State of Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. He leads statewide prevention and management of invasive species and animals in the marine and freshwater systems, including oversight of ballast water and biofueling programs. He's worked with invasive species management since 2008, with experience spanning policy development and on-the-ground implementation in Washington and even Texas. Prior roles were with the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center in King County and the Washington Invasive Species Council. He has a training in prescribed fire and emergency response systems and brings a strong focus on efficient coordination and rapid mobilization to address invasive species threats. He's grown up along the Columbia River and is deeply committed to protecting waterways for our future generations. So thanks, Justin.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Make me feel like I've been in this game for quite a while, Cassie. So really pleased to be joining this meeting and want to talk about pests of concern in Washington State from a slightly different lens. We often think about pests as agricultural pests, and ultimately invasive species of all types can be considered pests and are managed in a very similar way. In my role, one of the things I focus on are aquatic pests or aquatic invasive species, and want to highlight some three species that are the precipice of entering our state that will have massive economic, environmental, and cultural consequences, including impacting to agriculture. So ultimately something that's pretty concerning to the state. Wanted to start out with, why are invasive species important and what's at risk? And Washington is extremely diverse in many ways. It has lots of federal land. It has lots of opportunities to use our amazing resources, both for agriculture as well as trade. Ultimately, you can get an idea about the complexity of how we manage species of all types, and ultimately what's at risk when we don't effectively prevent and manage invasive species. And I think this is always a good starting place to really think about what's at risk. In terms of aquatic invasive species, thinking about impacts to shipping, for example, part of my work involves the marine trade and regulation of that, but also thinking about freshwater species that can impede commerce. We know that the shipping industry is worth billions of dollars annually. This is a key way that we engage in trade as a nation and as a state, and ultimately a lot of that is related to agricultural products. One of the things that I learned from Director Sanderson a couple years ago was that actually the importance of irrigated agriculture. 75% of our crops are irrigated, and ultimately that's worth over $9.6 billion annually. Beyond that, thinking about the way that we recreate and really that foundation of who we are as Washingtonians, so much of it is based in water on our own time, whether it's recreating or fishing. Ultimately, we're talking about billions of dollars at risk. And ultimately, we see this as a call to action, both from the State Department of Fish and Wildlife, but also through the Washington Invasive Species Council to protect these activities. Wanted to talk a little bit about what invasive species are and then segue into aquatic invasive species specifically. Our state legislature has defined both invasive species and aquatic invasive species. We often argue what the meaning of something is, which is all important. One of the things that is different in our state laws is that invasive species are defined by being non-native to the state of Washington. And this is critically important to think about because the federal definition is slightly different. But ultimately, we're thinking primarily about the state of Washington and things that pose a risk to our state. Within the state of Washington, the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife is the lead agency for managing invasive species in the animal kingdom. This doesn't include pests, domesticated animals, or livestock. That would be led by our sister agency, the Washington State Department of Agriculture. Forest, invasive insect, and diseases are managed by the Washington State Department of Natural Resources. And then mosquito and algae control, as well as shellfish sanitation, is managed by the Washington State Department of Health. Jessica did a fantastic job talking about the Invasive Species Council. Ultimately, invasive species of any type don't respect jurisdictional boundaries, and we need to work together across those same boundaries to be effective. And in the state of Washington, we're seen as being a national leader on this issue. And it's, a lot of that is by the partnerships between agencies, including that interagency council. Thinking about the approaches when we prevent and manage invasive species, it's very much similar to what you've been hearing about other threats and other pests. Communications and public engagement are key. You need to know how to identify something and how to report it. That's the action. We also all have a role to prevent these problem species, meaning that we must all take simple actions to avoid introduction and spread. State agencies and local agencies, as well as federal agencies, have regulations and programs to prevent management and introduction by keeping pests out of our state, for example, or out of our nation. But when that fails, we need to have adequate and sustained surveillance and monitoring to find very first established populations so that we can take swift action with the goal of eradication or complete removal. When we can't do that, or when we find a problem too late, our tactics change to that of containment, protecting assets, long-term management, suppression of populations below a specific threshold where there may be economic or environmental damages. And then once things have stabilized or the problem has been fully removed, oftentimes we think about restoration, or if there's things that have been severely impacted, recovery. Thinking about fisheries impacts, for example, is a really good option there. So kind of across the board, a lot of the same themes when we're talking about pests of all types, which is part of the reason why I was so pleased to be a part of this event today. In the state of Washington, when we're talking about prohibited and regulated invasive species, there's two different things to consider. Ultimately, certain species are lower risk and may be possessed. These are regulated aquatic invasive species. And I'd say the prime example of that would be goldfish. You may buy a goldfish, you may trade goldfish, you certainly can have them in your home, and we certainly are proponents of engaging those activities. But it is illegal to take that regulated invasive species and introduce it to our waters. And ultimately, the goal is to keep invasive species out of our environment, keep them contained so that they're not having detrimental impacts. What's slightly different is there is the classification of prohibited invasive species. These would be species that are high risk and are a priority for management as well as prevention. Those species may not be possessed, may not be introduced, may not be trafficked, And ultimately, these are the highest priority aquatic invasive animals, and the things that would qualify for rapid response, for quarantines, or potentially asking the governor to take action, mobilizing all agencies and jurisdictions towards supporting efforts of removal, such as our current ongoing governor's emergency to address invasive European green crab on our coasts. So we kind of talked about the problem, and we're going to talk about a specific problem in a moment, how to identify it. But really, when it comes to all invasive species, we need to not only be thinking about those targets and how to report them, but we need to be thinking about how to prevent them. And ultimately, there's really simple actions that we can all take to avoid spreading invasive species of all types, whether it's seeds on your boot or invasive species in your boat. Ultimately, when we're thinking about aquatics, it's that same idea. And there's lots of different activities we do on the ground or on water that have the potential and have some risk of introducing and spreading species. Ultimately, large vessels moving across the ocean are a fairly logical concern. But another is if you're hiking or recreating, moving from one watershed to another in our state, you could inadvertently be moving invasive species to a new area that then will have negative consequences. So moving into what are the tactics and what do you need to know and how can you help us? One of the best tools we have are regulated integrated pest management. Is a state, we want to keep invasive species that are prohibited and not established in our state out. We have the authority to inspect watercraft as well as other aquatic conveyances, anything that floats or moves water, at our borders. And ultimately, our strategy is one of perimeter defense, where we have mandatory watercraft inspection stations at different key pathways and transportation corridors. This is one part of a Western United States and Canadian model where there are multiple layers of inspection stations at different state or provincial borders for the purpose of protecting everyone's waters across the Western US and Canada. Ultimately, to put this into perspective, you can see that regularly we inspect over 50,000 vessels at these check stations. You can also see that we've intercepted more than 15 fouled conveyances with invasive freshwater mussels. We'll get to in a moment. Every year for the past 3 years, the trend continues. But also want to point out that these authorities in this program is protecting our waters from so much more than aquatic invasive animals and invasive mussels. Ultimately, this year was our highest level of inspections we've performed ever. Our team really did a fantastic job engaging the public, getting them to comply with the legal requirements of inspection. And ultimately, because we're inspecting watercraft for all sorts of biological materials or threats, we decontaminate anything that's found with hot water on site, ultimately rendering that problem mitigated. And of 3,374 decontaminations our staff performed, 2,938 were due to the presence of aquatic plants being on that vessel or that trailer. And ultimately, these activities are preventing not only invasive animals, but also invasive noxious weeds from entering our waters as well. So we're all in the same team and we're taking one comprehensive approach to this problem in the state. This is just another example. Wanted to give a shout out to our team. We haven't had increased funding and support from our state legislature to prevent invasive freshwater mussels specifically from entering our waters, one of the highest consequence pests in Washington. And ultimately, with this enhanced funding from our legislature, we've been able to staff our check stations longer into the year. In fact, some of them, like the one in Spokane, is open year round. Ultimately, other states are not as well resourced or supported, and their check stations close in the wintertime, targeting the traditional recreational boating season, which is the highest risk. However, because our check stations are open year round, we were surprised in January of 2025 when 2 tugboats coming from the Great Lakes actually pulled in unannounced, and you can imagine the shock when our inspectors found 21 gallons of invasive mussels, both quagga and zebra mussels, some of which were alive, at our station. And ultimately, had our stations been closed or had we not had these authorities in this program, Ultimately, these very small construction tugboats could have entered our waters, introducing invasive mussels. So I mentioned what happens when we find something in decontamination, and this is a simple action you can take too. When we do it with fouled vessels, we use hot water. There's very specific protocols, but ultimately we'll get into some simple practices you can take as you're boating or you're fishing that will have the same outcome of preventing aquatic invasive species. But really the best approach we have is detection and then mitigating that threat with hot water. The other thing I wanted to mention is there are many different pathways to address, and pathways of watercraft and human movement are only one of those pathways. The other is something we experienced in 2024 when there were contaminated pet products imported illegally to the United States that were contaminated with aquatic invasive species, freshwater mussels. Ultimately, from that illegal importation into Florida, they were distributed across the United States, and ultimately were distributed from different wholesalers to different retailers across the nation. What you see here actually is in the top map is from a wholesaler in Renton, the distribution within the state of Washington from that sale. And ultimately, we were able to work between the state agencies, the State Department of Agriculture, the State Department of Fish and Wildlife, with federal agencies, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the U.S. Department of Agriculture, to organize a response within the state of Washington between those four agencies. Of 24,000 potentially contaminated products illegally introduced in the United States, we were able to track down all 2,400 potentially contaminated products in the state of Washington, and we're able to destroy them and render their threat dealt with. So ultimately, just another great example of working together across jurisdictions toward one common goal, which is protecting our state, our environment, and our economy. So I mentioned what happens when invasive species slip through those gaps. That's ultimately when we need robust surveillance. In invasive species language, we use the terminology of invasive early detection monitoring. Here you see our 5 teams spread across the state. We have 2 teams of 2 in each of our 5 sites. And the polka dots, the sites are actually spread across the entire state. We have a risk-based model looking at data of public use, of fishing tournaments, of public access, of motorized boating versus non-motorized boating. There's a lot of different criteria that feeds into a rank of risk, a relative risk rank, and ultimately that defines how often we monitor it, from 1 time a year to 5 times a year. Ultimately, due to risk in the Snake River, we'll talk about shortly, we have 1 team that's doing nothing but monitoring the Snake River year-round, doing nothing but sampling those Snake River sites due to the uncertainty of invasive species and how they move through the water systems. Part of this is contingent on, okay, we found something, what do you do now? One thing that we'll get to in a moment, and you're going to see the app once again, is if you see something, say something, reporting it. But it's equally important to have a plan, both for rapid response and that long-term management. In not every situation can we eradicate or fully remove something, meaning we will have an extended response, and that's going to take an organization, it's going to take support, it's going to take a lot of activities to sustain what's needed to do that job. It's very difficult to maintain those sorts of programs, which is why we try to eradicate something. But ultimately, planning is something that we emphasize, very much like the Spot and Lanternfly Action Plan. If we don't have a plan, we will not be surprised when we're not successful. Which leads me to kind of the species of the moment, and I could talk for a full day about all the different invasive species threats that could impact our way of life in Washington and our agriculture and other things of value. But it's really worth highlighting the invasive freshwater mussels more than anything, due to the risk and the proximity to our waters. We are saying more and more invasive freshwater mussels, and when we say this, we are talking about freshwater mussels, and the 3 mussels that we're speaking about are tutracenid mussels, so zebra mussels and quagga mussels. Ultimately, they're a threat that has been facing our state for many, many years. We're also facing a new threat called golden mussels, Linoperna fortunei. Ultimately, those are mytilid mussels, and they're from a different area of the world. However, they have similar impacts. They have a similar look in terms of detection, and they have a similar pathway, and we address them in a similar way. So we're talking about invasive mussels more and more, but we're saying freshwater because they're freshwater. The thing to note here when you're thinking about any of these three species, if you're in a freshwater environment and you see a mussel that's attached to a hard surface, whether it's a rock or a piling or a dock, ultimately our native mussels don't attach to hard surfaces. The invasive mussels have byssal threads that are concrete-like fibrous threads that allow them to attach to hard surfaces. So if you're recreating, if you're boating, anything that is a mussel, a bivalve that is connected to a hard surface is certainly a red flag. And much like you've been hearing for other invasive pests, snap a photo and do report it. You could find the very first occurrence of something, allowing us to respond quickly and effectively in removing it fully. So they're freshwater mussels. They were introduced to North America in all three cases through contaminated ballast water. We'll never be able to prove that in court, but it's assumed. They attach to hard surfaces with concrete byssal-like threads. Ultimately, they all reach densities greater than 20,000 per square foot. So we will in all likelihood see a lot of them, which is the problem. And the thing to note is when we're talking about prevention, you need to be thinking about what you can see as well as what you can't see, because all three of these invasive species have a microscopic life stage, meaning that infested waters may not actually look infested, which pose a risk. And once they're established in the United States, they're moving domestically through the movement of watercraft, or if they're established in a moving water system, moving from one water body to another. So you see the chart kind of showing the size difference. Our native mussels are quite large. These mussels are quite small. Golden mussels can be up to 2 inches in size, but primarily they're all going to be an inch or under. So if you're seeing anything that's a bivalve that is under an inch and attached to a hard surface, it's in all likelihood something that we don't want here, and it's going to be a big problem. What is that problem? We have actually performed economic studies as well as partnered with others to look at the regional risk across the Western United States. Within Oregon, Washington, Montana, and Idaho, we looked at every hydropower system and learned how much those impacts were costing of mussel fouling to those hydroelectric facilities in the lower Colorado River system is a proxy for the Columbia River and our own dams. And ultimately, regionally, the risk is $500 million per year just to keep those dams running. In Washington in 2017, the Washington Invasive Species Council did a similar study just looking at Washington's dams. And the math was right because we validated that we face $100 million in risk and potential economic impacts and consequences to our hydroelectric facilities. This is not solving the problem. This is not preventing it from spreading to a new area. This is just keeping those hydroelectric facilities running. The cost is $100 million annually, which is astronomical. However, any raw water system is at risk from being fouled and impacted in the exact same way. So we are thinking about fish hatcheries, fish passage systems, agricultural irrigation systems. We just learned the value of that, $6.9 billion annually. Thinking about wastewater systems, drinking water systems for using raw water, surface water, thinking about legacy data centers, thinking about how we use the cloud and the internet. Some of those systems use raw water along the Columbia. And then navigational locks. We just learned that shipping on the Columbia River is worth billions of dollars. If those navigational locks don't function, that commerce is going to be impeded and that cost is going to rise astronomically. So we don't necessarily know the true impact, but what we do know is that for hydroelectric mitigation, for example, those costs will be borne by the ratepayer. Ultimately, those costs of mitigation will ultimately mean that we all spend more for power forever. Thinking about fish hatcheries, there are obligations to maintain fish at certain levels by utilities for having dams, for example, those costs will be borne by all of us. So the costs are pretty astronomical, and it's kind of a call to action for all of us to prevent this problem. Is if things couldn't get worse, the mussels actually have non-economic impacts as well. They reduce space for native species. They're known to actually displace native mussels, for example. They are filter feeders, so they filter good nutrients out of water, leaving the toxic nutrients that are unpalatable in the mussels. They ultimately filter the water to such a point that it increases water transparency and aquatic vegetation starts to disappear. It essentially turns waters into dead zones. That is not great for native species. Thinking about salmon and other resident fish, oftentimes they need cool, clean water, but if there's no positive nutrients, the food web will crash, and ultimately those species will no longer exist. One of the things we learned from the salmon recovery community is they're very concerned about mussels actually covering with those fibrous hard byssal threads across river bottoms, thinking about the Hanford Reach, for example. And it's possible that salmon may not be able to make reds, was the theory, because basically the mussels would encrust all those rocks. They would all be interconnected with these byssal-like threads, meaning the salmon couldn't dig their nests. Beyond that, we're also thinking about water quality and pollution. Not only do they leave negative nutrients, which arises harmful algal blooms, but they also bioaccumulate toxins in themselves, is the mussels, which then leaves those toxins in the environment so that fish and other species in the food web are actually around those toxins like heavy metals more. We know that there's increases in the Great Lakes of avian botulism, leading to massive bird die-offs. We know that there are harmful algal blooms associated with. We're already seeing harmful algal blooms on the rise in the state of Washington due to warming waters, and this would ultimately increase that. And then kind of the thing that's the hardest to quantify is really the potential impact to our way of life and who we are as a people. Thinking about treaty protected resources, thinking about salmon, thinking about all the things that really make Washington what Washington is, that loss and that sense of place can't be replaced. Once it's gone, it will be gone. And we can talk about the economic environmental impacts. They can be mitigated, but ultimately these mussels will not be eradicated. They will move through the infrastructure, and ultimately it changes who we are and how we interact with our lands. So to kind of put it in a picture, which is worth 1,000 words, looking at the image on the left, that's actually from Kansas. That's a freshwater body. It's pretty fouled. This is what it would be common after 2 to 3 years after introduction. You would then see layers of new adults growing on top of that. So ultimately you'd see more encrusting over time. They're razor sharp shells. We in the Western United States and in Washington rely on water for so much. And we have integrated it into our daily lives in many different ways. Ultimately, we can imagine what would happen if that system no longer functioned. So this imminent threat, and why I need everyone to be aware of this and to say something that they spotted, is because after 20 years of effort across the Western United States, quagga and zebra mussels are literally on our doorstep. Prevention works. It worked for 20 years. We slowed the spread of these invasive mussels significantly. However, we were all surprised and alarmed in 2023 when Governor Brad Little in Idaho announced that they had found quagga mussels in the free-flowing Snake River near Twin Falls. Ultimately, the state of Idaho is undergoing an eradication. We are wishing them the best. We've been shadowing them and learning from them. However, they are 375 river miles from us. They're 175 river miles from the state of Oregon. How far does the floating microscopic villager float is the question, the $100 million question. And ultimately, the state of Washington, the state of Oregon have met, and both jurisdictions agree we are at imminent threat. And the timing is uncertain. However, those economic impacts and those risks to us are fully known. It's worth also knowing that we need to be thinking about downstream movement. However, people are the main problem and the main vector, and movement of watercraft and other conveyances is the primary method. So we're thinking about downstream movement. We're also thinking about how important it is to prevent the introduction and spread of these species from other infested water bodies, shown with red dots. And I mentioned a network of Western inspection stations. On the right, you can actually see the centroid of the infested Snake River. At those watercraft inspections across the West, including Alaska, you can see how people are moving watercraft. So it's a person issue. It's all of us as we're recreating and moving things, needing to take actions to protect waters because people move and invasive species move with people. So what are we doing in the state of Washington? We have an all hands on deck effort to get our prevention increased and also increase our readiness, knowing that we face a threat imminently. But I wanted to point out some best management practices with my remaining time. Ultimately, I need your help to spread the word about this problem. It's a problem that's not yet in Washington. It's not a problem that we can see. It's not tangible at this point. However, we know that it will have massive effects forever. And so ultimately, we're trying to get the word out is the best we can, both in person, both online, in events such as this. We have resources and all sorts of things that we'd be happy to provide you. We are looking for folks that are willing to help us spread the word. And if you see something, ultimately you need to say something. The Washington Invasive Species mobile app is a great resource. It's free, it's a digital fact sheet. It also allows you to drop a pin and report your sighting to experts immediately. Goes right to their inbox. We also have a phone hotline as well as an email address and a website. There are many different pathways to say something, but the key is to say something. And beyond that, we all have a call to action. Whether you fish, whether you hunt, whether you recreate along the waters of our state, whether you make a living off water or irrigation, ultimately we all need to take simple steps to protect our waters. And ultimately those simple steps are clean. So anything that's touching the water, clean it all off, plants, animals, and mud, for example. Some things can be microscopic in water, like veligers, the floating life stage of the invasive mussels. So it's important to drain all the water out from your boat, from your equipment on site fully. And then before you go to a new watershed or you go to a different state, for example, let all parts of your boat dry. And we have great resources with cleaning checklists and guidance. If you are traveling out of state with a boat, for example, and you know there are invasive mussels present, give us a call. We'd be happy to schedule a meeting to take a look, to wash your boat with hot water and decontaminate it at no cost. Ultimately, we know there's a significant risk and we are happy to help you out. If you do work professionally in and around water, we have field protocols that we've developed with other state agencies, and we're happy to talk more about a training, whether you work for a dam or an irrigation company. Ultimately, we all need to work together for prevention and preparedness, and it's going to be on all of us to be successful. And with that, I think I'm right on time, so I probably don't have time for a lot of questions, Cassie, but back to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Justin. If there's any questions, go ahead and post them in the Q&A box if it's working for you. There was a comment that the potential economic and environmental risks are sobering. On a personal note, I have a watercraft that lives in Vancouver. It has been in the water for a couple of years and needs to come out of service. How long will these mussels or other aquatic organisms survive out of water? And what is the best and easiest way to decontaminate?
Fantastic question. And I didn't have enough time to talk about a new threat to the Lower Columbia specifically, which is the golden mussel. But kind of the Lower Columbia is at risk from invasive mussels from another end or introduction point. And ultimately, we actually have staff based in Ridgefield with hot water decontamination units. And if you email us at ais@dfw.wa.gov or call our hotline or go to our website, we'd be happy to have someone make contact with you to take a look. And ultimately, it would help us do some monitoring for the invasive mussels. And then if you're going to pull your boat out and move it elsewhere, it would make sure that we're not sending our invasive species to another jurisdiction. So really great question. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Justin. I don't see any more at the moment. We're going to go ahead and continue on. For those of you that are here for credits,
Cassie,
it is
there
actually...
was one question.
Go ahead.
There was a question about what people should do if they find an invasive species beyond reporting it.
That's a very good question. One we get frequently around invasive crabs and other things. Ultimately, our suggestion would be that you should snap a photo and report it, because the one that you found might be the tip of the iceberg. And ultimately, we have trained teams of detectors with equipment and tactics that most people don't. So we need to know so that we can go out there and do a delineation, figure out how big the threat is. The other thing is some species have lookalikes, like Jessica covered with emerald ash borer. The last thing we would want is for you to manage a species thinking it's bad and kill a native species or a protected species. So when in doubt, snap a photo and report it. Legally, if you are sure it's a prohibited invasive species, you may legally kill it on site or release it to that same water body. But ultimately, I would say if you kill the wrong species, you might be talking to an enforcement officer about it. So best to be careful, best to say something, and we'd really appreciate the data.
Awesome. Thanks. Anything else I might have missed before we move? Cool. So all of you that are here for
I'm
the
sorry,
research...
Cassie, it took me a second to unmute. There was another question posted in the Q&A. It says, and you may not know the answer, Justin, but Montana has numerous irrigation ditches and ponds. Is Montana on the same page as Washington?
Yeah, actually, most Western jurisdictions are on approximately the same page. The state of Montana has a really active program. They're closer to the threat on the East Coast than we are. We have 5 check stations. I believe they have 15, and they have a great program for watercraft inspections. If you're going to be traveling there, I would make contact with them, and then they can try to put a movement notice on your vessel so that you don't have to stop at 20 stations on your way to Montana. Ultimately, it'd be best to schedule a meeting, get you right to your destination, make sure you're clean, drain, dried, don't have a problem, and ultimately, we all work and talk to each other on a daily basis. And I would say Montana is very much on the same page, if not riding the page. Thank you.